Wait a minute, I think you may be onto something.
You bet I am. Well, let's face it, when it comes to women, you're the strikeout king.
I am.
You ever have a neighbor who's always outside, not doing anything important, just present, like a lawn ornament with opinions? That's kind of the energy Wings perfected, except the neighbor is an entire tiny airport where everyone knows your business before your suitcase hits the floor. Because on paper, Wings is simple. Two brothers run a little airline on Nantucket. They hang out at the same bar, deal with the same chaos, and somehow every day turns into a minor emergency. It's cozy. It's low stakes. It's the sitcom equivalent of getting a warm cookie at a place that definitely shouldn't have cookies. But here's the weird part. The behind-the-scenes stories and little trivia landings are way stranger than the show's laid-back vibe suggests. We're talking famous actors who almost played the leads. Real-world Nantucket details that are half true and half TV magic, and connections to other sitcom universes that make Wings feel like it was quietly hiding in plain sight. So today, we're counting down 15 weird facts about Wings, from surprising casting what-ifs to the kind of trivia that makes you pause and go, wait, why do I suddenly want to rewatch the whole series? Let's taxi to the runway and take off. 15. Wings is quietly part of the Cheers Frasier universe. If Wings ever felt like it belonged in the same smart but cozy sitcom ecosystem as Cheers and Frasier, that's because it basically does. The show wasn't just airing on NBC around the same era. It actually cross-pollinated with the Cheers world through guest appearances and shared continuity. This is one of those things that feels like a fun Easter egg until you realize it's bigger than that. It's not wink-wink similar tone. It's characters from one show can show up in the other, and it makes sense. Which is wild when you consider how different the vibes are. Cheers is a bustling Boston bar. Frasier is espresso and therapy. And Wings is a tiny airport where the hottest gossip travels faster than luggage. It also explains why Wings can feel oddly bigger than its setting. You're watching a small-town style sitcom on an island, but in the background it's connected to one of the most iconic TV sitcom lineages ever. And that's a very Wings thing. It looks small and simple, then casually reveals it has VIP access to sitcom history. 14. The show's awards buzz often landed on guest stars, not the core cast. For a series that ran 7 seasons and built such a loyal fan base, Wings has a funny reputation. People who love it really love it, but it didn't always get the spotlight like some of its Thursday night cousins. One of the weirder bits of trivia is how often the show's official recognition tends to circle around guest appearances and standout one-offs rather than the steady day-to-day work of the main ensemble. Which is ironic, because Wings is the definition of an ensemble comfort show. You don't tune in for one big dramatic event. You tune in for the rhythm. Joe trying to be responsible. Brian being charming in the most irresponsible way possible. Helen spiraling. Roy taking everything personally. Lowell living in his own solar system. And Faye floating in like a guardian angel with questionable boundaries. And yet, when you look back at what got attention, it often comes down to, remember when that person showed up? It's like the show became this reliable little stage where surprise visitors could steal a scene, while the main cast was the reason the stage existed in the first place. Classic sitcom injustice, honestly. 13. George Clooney almost flew in as Brian Hackett. Imagine turning on Wings and seeing George Clooney as Brian Hackett. Suddenly, Sandpiper Air has an alarming amount of charisma per square foot. The weird fact here is that years before Clooney became Clooney, he was circling the role of Brian during casting. It's one of those alternate timeline Hollywood stories that makes you realize how random TV history can be. Clooney had already been around. He wasn't an unknown, but he wasn't the global icon yet. In the early 90s, he was still in that phase where a single role could completely reroute your career. And Brian Hackett, as written, is basically handsome guy who talks his way out of consequences. That's a very Clooney-shaped lane. Would the show have been different? Probably. Steven Weber's Brian has this specific mix of charm and boyish chaos that fits perfectly against Tim Daly's grounded, stressed-out Joe. Clooney's energy might have tipped the balance. Suddenly, Brian isn't the lovable screw-up. He's the guy people can't stop watching, which changes the whole gravitational pull of the ensemble. It's fun to picture, but also kind of satisfying that the role went the way it did. Clooney got his iconic medical drama runway later. Wings got a Brian who feels like he genuinely belongs in that airport, not like he's about to walk off the set and onto a magazine cover. 12. Bryan Cranston once auditioned to play Joe Hackett. Here's a fact that makes your brain do a double take. Bryan Cranston, the guy who would eventually become one of the most celebrated actors in TV history, was at one point in the orbit of Wings. Reports over the years have said Cranston auditioned for Joe Hackett. And that is hilarious to imagine, because Joe is the straight man anchor. He's the one trying to keep the airline, the relationships, and basically the laws of physics from collapsing. Tim Daly plays him with this simmering frustration, like Joe is constantly 2 seconds away from giving a calm, mature speech, and then swallowing it, because no one around him deserves that much emotional effort. Now picture Cranston in that role. Not Walter White Cranston, but still, Cranston has this elastic comedic intensity. Even in comedy, he can go from calm to unhinged in a blink. Joe Hackett, with that energy, might have felt less like responsible older brother, and more like man actively fighting his own descent into chaos. The cool takeaway isn't "what a shame." It's the reminder that sitcom casting is a weird game of inches. One audition here, one callback there, and suddenly your TV history changes. Cranston didn't land Wings, and later found roles that used his full range. Wings kept its grounded center. Everyone wins. Except maybe our curiosity about the timeline, where Joe Hackett starts giving monologues that feel a little too intense for an airport bar. 11. The Club Car is a real Nantucket place you can actually visit. One of the most charming, wait, that's real? Facts about Wings is the bar. The Club Car, the show's home base where everyone dumps their problems, celebrates tiny victories, and gets into arguments that last exactly as long as the commercial break, has roots in a real Nantucket location. Now, TV magic is still TV magic. The show wasn't literally shot in the bar, like it's a reality show about people refusing to go home. But the idea comes from an actual Nantucket spot, which makes the whole setting feel a little more grounded. Because Wings is a show that sells you on place. You can practically smell the sea air and hear the little propeller plane buzzing overhead. Then Roy storms into frame like a human foghorn. What's funny is how this adds to the show's cozy lie. Wings presents Nantucket like a small world where the same dozen people rotate through the same 2 locations forever. The real island obviously has more going on than airport plus bar plus occasional porch conversation. But the existence of a real-world club car makes the fiction feel less like a set and more like a slightly exaggerated version of island routine. So if you ever visit Nantucket and feel the urge to order something dramatic and complain about your coworkers, congratulations. You've been spiritually drafted into the Wings cast. For 10. Tom Nevers Field is real, but not in the way you'd expect. The airport in Wings is called Tom Nevers Field, and it sounds like the kind of place where a single plane lands twice a day and everyone applauds. But here's the weird truth. Tom Nevers is a real area on Nantucket, and Tom Nevers Field isn't the island's airport. This is peak sitcom geography. Take a real place name, attach it to a fictionalized version, and let the audience fill in the gaps. If you went to Nantucket looking for Tom Nevers Field as the official airport, you'd quickly realize you're chasing a TV label, not a travel itinerary. What makes this fun is that it highlights how Wings uses Nantucket like a storybook setting. It's real-ish. Real enough to feel authentic, but shaped into a neat little sitcom snow globe where the same people run into each other forever. That's why the airport feels so intimate on the show, like it's a neighborhood corner store that happens to have planes. And honestly, it works. Because if Wings used the actual airport's full reality, bigger operations, more people, more modern logistics, it would lose that small, funny pressure cooker vibe. Tom Nevers Field is basically a stage name. It's Nantucket wearing sitcom makeup, and the result is a setting that feels real in your memory, even if the map doesn't fully back it up. 9. The Sandpiper airplane has a weirdly real afterlife. Okay, this is one of those trivia bits that makes Wings feel like it accidentally spilled into real life. The plane used in the show's imagery, especially the iconic little aircraft vibe associated with Sandpiper, has been tied to real-world aviation in a way fans love to chase down. Over time, aviation nerds and Wings fans have tracked tail numbers, plane models, and the kind of production details most of us only notice as, yep, plane. And the story that's floated around for years is that one of the aircraft associated with the show's branding and footage stayed in active service long after Wings ended, becoming a little moving relic of the series. Even if you don't care about the exact serial number rabbit hole, the spirit of the fact is what matters. Wings picked a type of plane that wasn't Hollywood glossy. It was practical. It looked like something a tiny airline would actually run. And because those planes really do keep flying for decades, there's something delightful about imagining Sandpiper's vibe still buzzing around in the wild. It's the perfect Wings kind of nostalgia. Not a fancy museum piece, not a big dramatic artifact, just a humble little propeller plane that refuses to retire. Much like Roy Biggins's Grudges. 8. Helen's character was almost a completely different person. Helen Chappelle is one of the show's great comedic engines. Dramatic, intense, romantic, stubborn, and emotionally capable of turning a casual comment into a Shakespearean tragedy. But one of the stranger bits of behind-the-scenes lore is that Helen's character concept went through alternate versions during development. Over the years, fans have talked about how the role was initially imagined differently, sometimes with different background details, and in some telling, even a different surname and cultural angle. Development is messy like that. A character starts as a sketch, then casting choices reshape everything. Suddenly the version you know becomes obvious, and it's hard to picture the earlier drafts. What makes this so interesting is that Helen feels incredibly specific. Her intensity is so particular that you assume the character was born fully formed. But sitcom characters are often found in the process. Writers and producers see what an actor can do, and the character becomes tailored to that. So the weird fact isn't just, Helen could have been different. It's that Wings might have had a totally different emotional center if Helen's personality, background, or performance style had shifted. Because when Helen is on screen, she doesn't just participate, she claims the room. If you tweak that, you tweak the whole ecosystem. And suddenly the airport feels a little less like a stage, and a little more like a workplace where people might actually survive. 7. The show basically shrugs at Helen's accent. And that's the joke. Let's talk about the southern accent. Because Wings is set on Nantucket, and Helen shows up sounding like she could scold you for running in church. And at some point you realize the show is not particularly interested in explaining it in a realistic way. This is sitcom logic at its finest. If the character is funny, the details don't have to make perfect sense. Helen's accent becomes part of her identity. Like her emotional volume knob is permanently turned up, and the accent is just the audio packaging. The even weirder thing is how the show handles it over time. There's no big, clean, here's the detailed backstory and how she ended up here documentary explanation. It's more like, she's here, this is who she is, and now watch her emotionally body slam Joe and Brian with romantic expectations. And honestly, that's the correct decision. Because the second you over-explain a sitcom's charming oddity, you risk deflating it. Helen's accent is part of the show's cartoon reality, the same reality where Roy can storm into the bar and turn a mild inconvenience into a personal war, and where Lowell can hold a full conversation that only he seems to understand. So the weird fact is that the accent is basically treated like weather. It exists, it happens, and everyone moves on because they've learned. You do not fight the Helen Chappelle experience. You survive it. 6. The name Roz Doyle has a Wings connection. If you're a Frasier fan, you know Roz Doyle is one of the most iconic names in sitcom history. Sharp, confident, and always 2 steps ahead of Frasier's nonsense. But there's a bit of shared creative DNA here. People involved in the Cheers Wings Frasier orbit have long talked about naming connections and tributes that drifted between these shows. The weird fact is that Roz Doyle has been associated, in sitcom lore, with a behind-the-scenes tribute connected to the same creative ecosystem that included Wings. In other words, the people making these shows weren't just building separate sitcoms. They were building a little community. And communities leave fingerprints. Now, even if you don't want to chase the full who exactly was honored and how thread, it's still fascinating because it shows how these series share more than guest stars. They share personnel, writers, producers, and a tone. Smart comedy that can be warm without being corny. It's like Wings is the quiet cousin at the family reunion. Doesn't talk as much as Cheers, doesn't get the same spotlight as Frasier, but is absolutely in the family photo. And these little name and tribute stories are the kind of detail that makes rewatching more fun, because you start seeing the shows as connected tissue rather than separate islands. Kind of like Nantucket, honestly. 5. Lowell was tailor-made for Thomas Haden Church. Lowell Mather is not a normal sitcom character. He's like if a golden retriever learned how to do human speech, but still thinks in sniffing the air logic. He's sweet, earnest, and sincerely convinced he understands the world, even when he very clearly does not. And one of the best weird facts about Lowell is that the role is widely described as being shaped around Thomas Haden Church's specific comedic vibe. This isn't unusual in sitcoms, but it's rare when it feels this obvious. Lowell's rhythm, his pauses, his sideways logic, his wide-eyed sincerity, feels like it comes from a very specific kind of performer. When a character is written generically, any good actor can fill it. When it's written with a particular performer in mind, it becomes a custom-fit suit. Lowell is a custom-fit suit made out of friendly confusion. It also explains why Lowell stands out even in a cast full of big personalities. Roy is loud, Helen is emotional, Antonio is theatrical, Faye is Faye, but Lowell is the show's secret seasoning. He makes everything around him funnier by reacting to it like he's learning humans in real time. So when you learn Lowell was essentially built to match Church's strengths, it clicks. The character isn't just the dumb one. He's the optimistic philosopher of the airport. He's the guy who says something that makes no sense. And then, 5 seconds later, you realize it somehow made perfect sense emotionally. 4. Lowell's exit storyline goes full crime thriller. Most sitcom exits are gentle. A character moves away. A character takes a job. A character follows their dreams. Wings looked at that tradition and said, what if we did something completely unhinged? Lowell's exit storyline famously leans into a more dramatic, almost absurdly heightened scenario, one that involves danger, criminal elements, and the kind of this escalated quickly tone you'd expect from a different genre. It's not just Lowell left the airline. It's Lowell got pulled into a situation that requires a big, plot-driven send-off. And that's weird in the best way, because Wings is normally a show about everyday annoyances. Money problems, romance problems, work problems, and Roy Biggins waking up each morning to choose violence. So when a character's departure feels like it's borrowing from a thriller, it stands out. But it also tracks, because Wings occasionally liked to swing big when it wanted to shake up the formula. It would take the comfortable airport bar vibe and toss a grenade into it, just enough to keep things from feeling too repetitive. The result is a farewell that fans remember not just because a beloved character is leaving, but because the show made the exit feel like an event. It's like the writers said, if Lowell's going, we're not letting him quietly slip out the side door. Which, frankly, would have been out of character anyway. Lowell doesn't leave places. He wanders out, smiling, while everyone else is yelling. 3. There's a strange British Wings remake pilot floating in TV history. If you love obscure TV trivia, here's one that feels like it was invented by a bored person on a message board, except it's real enough to have a reputation. Wings had a British remake attempt in the form of a pilot. The premise gets shifted, the setting gets localized, and suddenly you're watching a familiar skeleton wearing an entirely different cultural outfit. This happens a lot with American sitcoms, but it's always weird to imagine Wings, a show that's so tied to Nantucket's vibe, trying to transplant its energy to a different island context. And because it was a pilot, it lives in that limbo where it's not widely available, not commonly rerun, and not part of mainstream memory. So it becomes legend. The kind of TV artifact people whisper about like it's a cursed videotape. I heard it exists. My friend's cousin saw a clip once. It's either terrible or secretly brilliant. The funniest part is how perfect Wings is for this kind of remake attempt. It's a workplace ensemble in a contained setting, with a built-in hangout spot and a rotating cast of locals. That's remake bait. But the magic of Wings isn't just the setup. It's the specific balance of the actors and the writing rhythm. So the weird fact isn't only that a British pilot existed, it's that Wings is the kind of show that seems easy to remake. Until you realize it's like trying to recreate a favorite comfort food. You can copy the ingredients. You won't copy the feeling. 2. The theme music is classical, and it makes the show feel fancier than it is. Wings opens with a theme that feels like you're about to watch something prestigious. It's this sweeping, elegant, classical piece that makes Nantucket look like a romantic postcard and makes Sandpiper Air feel like it's operating at the level of high art. And then the show starts, and Roy Biggins walks in like a man who believes the universe owes him an apology. That contrast is part of what makes the theme so weirdly perfect. Most sitcoms go for catchy pop jingle energy. Wings goes for, please silence your phones, the performance is about to begin. It gives the show a unique identity. Even if you don't know the composer or the title, you feel it. This isn't just a goofy workplace comedy. It's a goofy workplace comedy that thinks it's a tiny bit refined. It also sets up the show's emotional tone better than you'd expect. Wings can be silly, but it can also be genuinely warm and occasionally heartfelt. The classical theme signals that the show wants to be cozy, not frantic. It's not aiming for rapid-fire chaos every second. It wants to glide. And that's why the theme sticks in people's memories. It's like the show's secret weapon. It tells you, relax, you're in good hands. Then it drops you into a bar where the same people argue about the same things for 7 seasons. And somehow, you're grateful for it. 1. A John Ritter guest appearance basically predicted real life. John Ritter guest starred on Wings in connection to a character played by Amy Yazbek, who he later married in real life. On the show, Ritter appears as an ex in the orbit of Yazbek's character, creating that very sitcom-y kind of tension. The past showing up in the present. Old sparks, awkward moments, the whole thing. It's the kind of episode you watch and think, oh, this is a fun guest star moment. And then you zoom out and realize real life kept writing after the credits rolled. This kind of thing happens more than people think. Actors cross paths on sets, do guest spots, work together once, and years later you find out that was the beginning of something bigger. But it's still weirdly satisfying when it lines up with the fiction in a way that makes you raise an eyebrow. And it's also a reminder of what Wings did so well. It was a show that could attract great guest talent because it was an easy fit. The setting is contained, the characters are strong, and the tone is welcoming. You can drop a guest star in and instantly create a story. So yeah, Wings wasn't just comfort TV. It was also quietly full of these strange little footnotes where TV history and real life overlap. which makes rewatching feel like you're not just revisiting episodes, you're revisiting a whole era. Conclusion. So there you have it. Wings, the coziest little sitcom about a tiny airline, turns out to have a trivia trail that's way bigger than its runway. Near-miss casting stories that could have changed the entire vibe. Real-world Nantucket details hiding under TV geography. A theme song that makes the show feel classier than Roy Biggins has ever felt in his life. And connections to the wider Cheers Frasier orbit that make Wings feel like the underrated sibling at a very famous sitcom family reunion. And that's kind of the magic of the show, isn't it? It's small on purpose. It's familiar on purpose. You return to it because it feels like a place where the same people will always be there, arguing at the bar, making the same mistakes, and somehow finding their way back to each other by the end of the episode. Now, I want to know, which fact surprised you most? And who's your MVP of Sandpiper Air? Joe, Brian, Helen, Roy, Lowell, Antonio, or Faye? Drop it in the comments, and if you've got a favorite Wings deep cut I didn't mention, share it, because at this airport, the gossip is always boarding early.